Now, following our documentation, we need to create 3 primary integration functions which are specific to our SaaS. So in our documentation, we can see this section, creating entitlement function, which we are going to follow. So let's first start with the processPurchaseInfo function. This function is responsible for processing a purchase that happened at Freemius, identifying the features or entitlements that came with it, and then finally storing the purchase information locally in our database. So this will store the purchase in the table that we just created in the previous video. Now, basics of the code is already given by our documentation here. So I will start by copy pasting it. And we already have a file named user entitlement. And this is the file where we'll be putting all of the source code. So as I copy it, the first thing I have to do is this purchase info. It's a type of an argument. It comes from the Freemius SDK. So let's import that. Now, what this function is doing is it's trying to find the local user or the user on our SaaS by the email address that came with the Freemius purchase. If the user is not present, then we simply bail here. However, depending on use cases, we can also register the user here, send them some other email. So we are free to do whatever we want to do. Then this is calling the toEntitlement record on the FS purchase, which is something we get from the SDK, and it is storing the entitlement information in our database. So toEntitlement record is a function that gives out the data in the exact same schema that we saw earlier. But however, we need to figure out the credit that came with the purchase. Let's write the imaginary function here. Let's say constant credits equals await get credits for user purchase. And we want to pass the user object and the FS purchase to it. Then we will do the upsert as our documentation. Finally, if credits is greater than 0, then we can give the credit to the user. Now, add credits is a very simple function that came with the boilerplate. This is essentially adding the credit to the user through a database operation. So now let's go ahead and try to implement the get credits for user purchase function. Let's do the implementation here. Async function. This is of type user. Let's start by hoping that credits is 0. And what we get from the FS purchase is the pricing ID of the purchase itself. To keep things simple, let's write another imaginary function. Let's call it get entitled credits. That will give me back the credit that comes with the purchase. And we will finally return the credits. So now something interesting will happen as we go ahead and implement the get entitled credits function. So you can see we already have a static mapping here. It maps a record to resources. For example, for the starter, we have resources of 100 credits per month. So this is a static information that maps the entitlement that comes with various subscriptions or top-ups. Now we already stored the pricing ID of different plans and subscriptions. So now using that, we can create another map here. Let's call it pricing to resource map. And what this map will do is it will create a map between the pricing ID that comes from Freemius to our local static information here. So for example, if the pricing ID is starter, then I want to use the resource that comes with the starter record from my static information. I can now go ahead and finish the implementation of this map. So essentially, every pricing ID that comes from Freemius is now mapped to my local resources. And now inside the get entitled credits function, I can use this information. Let's say credit is resource record. Now I need to find the key of the resource from the FS purchase. For that, we can use the newly created map. FS purchase comes with the pricing ID that we need. So it's either this or we can fall back to 0 just as a safety. Now one other thing is that we are promising 100 credits per month for the starter plan. Similarly, 200 credits per month for the professional and 500 credits per month for the business. However, the purchase itself can be annual. Now there are ways to implement this. To keep things simple, what we can do is check if FS purchase is annual, then we can give the annual credits upfront, or we can give the credit that comes with the purchase itself. Now we will also see in the future how the renewal of credits will work out through webhooks, but for now this completes our implementation. Now another thing we have to do inside the get credits for user purchase is to make sure we are not giving credits twice for the same purchase. Now inside the processPurchaseInfo function, we can see that we are storing the purchase information or the purchase entitlement in our local database. So we can use this knowledge to determine whether the credits has already been given. So let us do something like this. Constant is existing equals await Prisma user fs entitlement dot find unique, and I can find the entity by the license ID. The license ID will always be unique. Freemius guarantees it. So where fs license ID equals this. So if this is not existing, then we want to give the credits. Otherwise, we want this to stay at 0 and then we are returning it. Great. So now this will be picked up by our processPurchaseInfo function. Then we will store the entitlement in our local database. And if the credit is more than 0, then we will give it to the user. Now this concludes the primary processPurchaseInfo function. Now this will differ, of course, based on your necessities and application logic, but this gives you the basic idea. In our simple demonstration, we have only one entitlement per purchase, so our mapping is 1:1. However, you can have any complex mapping of your choice. Now let's move on to the next video where we'll implement the rest of the integration functions.